All right. Yeah. Thank you for having me. Good day, everyone. I'm Chuck Doerrler, and we're going to talk about who's accountable for that. And we're going to talk about accountability all through the presentation. And what I did was break this out into two parts. So first, we're going to talk about, what is accountability? Who's the audience for this? We want to define accountability. Also, what's the difference between accountability and responsibility? Because they're kind of a lot of times they're almost the same. So we're going to take a look at the difference there. And then, when you're driving accountability, you've got some related behaviors that kind of naturally come out of that. And so we're going to take a look at those. And then part two, we're really going to get down to and say, well, how do I get accountability? So we'll look at some simple strategies. I'm going to focus really more on one than some of the others. And then we're going to take a look at project culture. How do I build it into my project culture? And if you don't think about project culture, if you don't think about building one, you probably should, right? Because one will get built for you, and it may not be the one you want. And so we'll talk a little bit about how you develop that culture of accountability, and we're all accountable, at the end of the day. And then I'm going to leave you with a key message at the end. It's their plan, and then from there we'll wrap it up and go into some Q&A. All right, so let's move on here. So the target audience. So this is really who's going to benefit from this? Well, it's anyone who's going to be holding a meeting. That has got a deliverable, and someone's got to do something at the end of that meeting, and then you've got to find out did they do it or not. If you're a team manager, you would benefit from this as well. I'm really going to focus, though, on project managers, project leaders, and sometimes I think of them as the same thing, because if you're a project manager, you're leading the project, right? You don't want to be an administrator. And then depending on what framework you're running, waterfall, agile, Kanban, maybe you're a team manager holding team meetings. Those types of frameworks are going to apply here. If it's waterfall, hopefully you're transitioning or transforming into something that's more agile based. And when I put agile in here, let me qualify that a little bit. So if you're a Scrum Master and you're running a 100% allocated, persistent team, accountability and some of those behaviors are kind of built into the framework already. And so really when we say agile, we're thinking about Kanban as well, but maybe sort of a hybrid where your team is got an agile mindset, but it's not 100% dedicated. So it's a little bit waterfallish in a way that you've got a lot of matrixed employees. You've got, or I should say, team members that are, maybe they're 25% allocated, and then the other 75% is kind of scattered through other projects, right? So that's kind of who we're targeting and who would probably benefit from this. But I think anyone who runs meetings and expects, the attendees to do something, this is, it's for you. So if we move on to the definition, like what is accountability? So when I thought about this webinar, and I said, well, let's go to Merriam-Webster and see, what does Merriam-Webster say the definition is. So the first one here, the quality or state of being accountable. God, I kind of hate it when they define a word with a part of the word, So anyway, so I have to look up another word. So I looked up accountable, and accountable said, it's equivalent to answerable. I thought, yeah, that's good. That's strong. Another part of Merriam-Webster said, especially an obligation or willingness to accept responsibility or to account for one's actions. So I thought about that. So, let's use an obligation to account for one's actions, meaning being answerable. I think that's really what accountability is, your actions, you're responsible for your actions, right? And so responsibility is in there. And I thought, well, is it how are they different, right? So if we look at well, actually, what I did was I went to a site called Diffin.com. I don't know if you've ever been there, but you can put in two words that you like. Hey, what's the difference between this and this? And it kind of lays it out for you. It's I think it's using a lot of Merriam-Webster things as well. But I thought, hey, let's think about this, because you hear a lot of people say, and usually it's, like a politician or a business leader or a celebrity, a sports star, and they'll say, well, I'll take responsibility, for whatever bad thing that they did. You hear that a lot in the news. And I thought, is that right? So if we look at this, responsibility is something that's shared, right? You can share your responsibility, but accountability you can't. I thought, wow, that's right, because it's your actions, right? And the second bullet there is about being answerable, right? It doesn't mean you're not just being responsible for something, but ultimately being answerable for your actions. And then the last, which is really it ties it all together. Accountability is something you hold a person to only after a task is done, right? Responsibility, you can say before even the task, I'll take responsibility for doing that. But actually doing it is being accountable. So it's a little different. And so next time you hear someone on the news or you're reading on the internet, hey, I take responsibility for that, for an act that happened after, right? They did something and now they say, oh, well, I'll take responsibility. I'm taking responsibility for it. Think about that and say, should they really be using the term, accountability, or I'll be accountable. I'm accountable for my actions. I think that's really what they should be saying. So we kind of know what accountability is, and let's think about some of the behaviors. Like if you're in an accountability environment where you're holding people to or being answerable to their actions, it's your project team. It starts promoting some other behaviors, right? Especially self-organization. If somebody's accountable for what they're doing, they're probably self-organized. And self-organization is it's an agile value principle, and usually it's in agile you're thinking about self-organization as the team being self-organized. Here we're kind of bringing it down into the individual level, because that's what accountability is. And so, as someone is more self-organized, they're accountable, they're answerable for their actions, and it starts driving some of these other behaviors. So if you're in your checkpoint meetings, and you're meeting maybe once a week, twice a week, whatever it is, you start talking about these things, and as people are being accountable for delivering or executing on things, suddenly there's transparency there, because we see, well, what they're actually doing. They're credible because they're not just saying, hey, I'm going to do this. They're actually doing it, and that kind of drives collaboration within your team as well, right? Because when you have transparency, then other people can get in on the action, so to speak, right? So that if Joe says, hey, I'm going to meet with the architect tomorrow about the design, well, maybe the DBA says, hey, I'd like to see where the database is sitting in that design, or something like that, right? So suddenly you've got a couple of team members starting to get together and work together, and again, accountability and being answerable kind of drives a lot of these behaviors. And if you notice, I've got accountability, the big green circle, sitting above all of these other behaviors, right? These other values, and you can add some more in too. I didn't exhaust the list, but you could put in responsibility, right? We saw that it's closely associated with accountability. You could add in trust, right? Credibility and trust as well. But when you bring all of that together, you've got high performance. Your team is a high performing team. So you may say, well,